The most dangerous humans are never the loud ones. The chains around Ethan Ward's wrists rattled softly as two armored guards dragged him through the glowing corridor of House Veilira. Purple light spilled across the polished black floor beneath his boots while hundreds of alien nobles gathered inside the grand hall beyond the silver doors. The air smelled like burnt ozone and cold perfume. Somewhere overhead, ancient reactor vents hummed through the palace walls like distant thunder. Ethan kept his eyes lowered, not because he was afraid, because after 20 years of war, looking people in the eye became dangerous. "Move, slave," one of the guards snapped, shoving him forward. Ethan stumbled half a step before steadying himself again. 6'3", broad shoulders, faded gray prison uniform hanging loose against a body lined with old scars. A human built like someone who had survived too much. The doors opened with a hydraulic hiss. Music echoed through the chamber. Crystal chandeliers floated beneath a domed ceiling nearly 100 feet high, their pale blue light reflecting off gold armor and jeweled robes. Alien aristocrats turned toward him instantly. Some smirked. Others whispered behind elegant silver masks. To them, humans were relics now. Dangerous animals from a dying species that had lost the Terran Wars decades ago. At the center of the room stood Lady Veilira herself. Tall, blue-violet skin glowing beneath a dark ceremonial gown threaded with thin lines of gold. Her silver eyes studied Ethan with calm amusement as she rested one hand on the railing above the crowd. "So," she said softly, her voice amplified through hidden speakers, "this is the famous Terran stock my merchants promised me." Quiet laughter spread through the hall. Ethan said nothing. Veilira descended the marble staircase slowly, her heels clicking against stone with perfect rhythm. "I expected something taller," she continued. "Perhaps humans shrink after losing every war they start." More laughter. Ethan stared past her shoulder at the massive palace windows where stars burned across the blackness of space. He could see battle scars on the moon outside. Old orbital fire. Some things never healed. Veilira stopped inches from him. "Look at me when I speak, human." Ethan finally raised his eyes. The room grew strangely quiet. There was no anger in his face. No submission either. Just exhaustion so deep it almost looked empty. Veilira's expression shifted for half a second. Confusion maybe. Then her smile returned. "Interesting," she murmured. "You don't tremble." One of the nobles laughed loudly from across the room. "Perhaps the slave is defective." Veilira circled Ethan slowly like someone inspecting a machine. "Tell me, human, did your people truly believe they could challenge the Zyrith Dominion?" Ethan's voice came low and rough. "We did." The room fell silent again. Not because of what he said, because of how calmly he said it. Veilira tilted her head slightly. "And what did that belief earn you?" Ethan looked toward the stars again. "Graves." For the first time that night, nobody laughed. A cold draft moved through the chamber. Somewhere deep inside the palace, warning alarms flickered once and vanished. Most of the nobles ignored it. Ethan didn't. His eyes shifted instantly toward the ceiling vents. Measuring distance. Calculating exits. Veilira noticed. "What is it?" she asked quietly. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Your security teams are 30 seconds too late." Before she could respond, the palace lights suddenly cut to black. Darkness swallowed the grand hall so completely that even the stars outside disappeared behind the polarized palace glass. For half a second, nobody moved. Then the emergency lights activated in deep crimson pulses, painting every frightened face blood red. Somewhere above them, metal groaned. The nobles panicked instantly. Crystal goblets shattered across the marble floor as dozens of aristocrats rushed toward the exits at once, their expensive robes tangling beneath flashing alarm lights. "Seal the chamber," someone shouted. "Protect Lady Veilira." But the palace security systems did not respond. Ethan already knew why. The attack had started 12 seconds earlier than expected. Whoever planned this understood military timing. He heard the soft clicking sound first. Magnetic boots against ventilation. Steel. 3 hostiles above the ceiling panels. Maybe 4. Veilira stepped backward as her guards raised energy rifles toward the darkness overhead. "What is happening?" she demanded. Ethan did not answer immediately. His eyes tracked the ceiling, counting movement, calculating trajectories the same way his brain still calculated artillery paths in his sleep. "Professional strike team," he finally said. Not pirates. Another loud groan shook the chamber. One of the floating chandeliers flickered violently before crashing onto the banquet floor in an explosion of blue sparks. The crowd screamed. Ethan barely reacted. Veilira noticed that too. The human slave stood perfectly still while everyone else lost control. Even the armed guards looked nervous now. How do you know this? She asked quietly. Ethan looked toward the sealed entrance doors. Because amateurs breathe too fast before they attack. Then the ceiling exploded inward. Smoke poured into the chamber. Black armored figures dropped from the ventilation shafts using silent grav harnesses, their rifles glowing faint blue beneath the emergency lights. Panic spread instantly. Guards moved to intercept, but the attackers ignored everyone except one target. Veilira. Ethan saw it immediately. Precision formation. Focused advance. No wasted movement. They were not here to conquer the palace. They were here to remove one woman and disappear. A pulse round scorched across the room, striking the railing inches from Veilira's shoulder. She stumbled backward in shock as another shot shattered the floor beside her feet. Ethan moved before she could react. One powerful step. The chains around his wrists snapped tight as he grabbed her arm and pulled her behind a fallen banquet table just as glowing debris sprayed across the chamber. Veilira stared at him in disbelief. You touched me, she whispered, stunned more by the act itself than the danger around them. Ethan ignored her. Stay down. More guards flooded into the room now, but confusion slowed them. The attackers had already positioned themselves near the exits. Military discipline. Terran style. Ethan's expression darkened slightly. He had seen tactics like this before. Too many times. One of the attackers raised a weapon toward the civilians fleeing near the eastern wall. Ethan's jaw tightened instantly. Idiots, he muttered under his breath. Veilira looked at him sharply. What? For the first time since entering the palace, anger flickered behind Ethan's eyes. Not rage. Something colder. Older. They are losing control of the room. The nearest attacker suddenly turned toward Ethan. The rifle hesitated for half a second. Then the masked figure froze completely. Even through the smoke and flashing lights, Ethan recognized the reaction immediately. Recognition. Fear. The attacker slowly lowered the weapon. Impossible. The distorted voice whispered through the helmet speaker. Another attacker turned toward Ethan too. Then another. Veilira noticed the shift instantly. The strike team had stopped advancing. Nobody fired. Nobody moved. The entire room seemed to hold its breath as the lead attacker stared directly at the human slave standing beside the fallen table. Ward. The voice finally said, barely audible beneath the alarms. Ethan closed his eyes for one exhausted second. Like a man hearing a name he buried years ago. The red emergency lights pulsed slowly across the chamber like a dying heartbeat. Nobody spoke. Even the palace alarm seemed quieter now. The attackers stood frozen beneath the drifting smoke, their rifles lowered just enough to reveal uncertainty. Fear had entered the room, but not because of the assault. Because of a name. Ethan opened his eyes again. Tired blue eyes. Calm eyes. The kind that had seen cities burn from orbit and still remembered the sound children made when they cried afterward. You have the wrong man, he said quietly. The lead attacker took one cautious step backward instead of forward. Negative, the distorted voice replied. Facial structure 98% confirmed. Around them, Veilira's guards shifted nervously, unsure whether to continue firing or stand down. The nobles hiding behind shattered tables looked completely confused now. One whispered softly, "Who is Ward?" Nobody answered him. Ethan slowly straightened to his full height beside the overturned banquet table. The broken restraint chains still hung from his wrists, metal links catching flashes of crimson light every few seconds. Veilira stared at him in silence. Her breathing had slowed, but confusion spread across her face now stronger than fear. The human slave she purchased 3 days ago suddenly stood at the center of a military standoff, and trained soldiers seemed terrified of him. Explain this, she demanded sharply. Ethan did not look at her. Not now. The lead attacker raised one gloved hand toward the others. A silent command. The strike team instantly shifted formation without a word, disciplined movements sharp and practiced. Terran military doctrine. Old Terran military doctrine. Ethan recognized it immediately. So did part of him he thought had died years ago. Who sent you, he asked. The question sounded simple, But something changed in the room after he spoke. His voice no longer sounded like a prisoner. It sounded like command. The lead attacker hesitated. "We are not your enemy, sir." "Sir." Veilira caught that instantly. Her silver eyes narrowed. Ethan finally looked toward the strike leader. "That was not my question." Silence stretched for several long seconds. Smoke drifted through the broken ceiling vents above them, while distant security sirens echoed deeper inside the palace. Somewhere outside, engines roared across the night sky. More ships approaching. The attacker removed his helmet slowly. A human male, mid-30s, short black hair damp with sweat. A faded scar cut across his jawline. He looked at Ethan the way soldiers looked at ghosts. "Captain Nolan Reyes," he said carefully. "Third Terran Remnant Fleet." Several alien nobles recoiled immediately at the words Terran Remnant. Most believed the remaining human war fleets vanished after the collapse wars 15 years earlier. Ethan's expression barely changed. "You should not be here, Captain." Reyes swallowed hard. "Sir, when intelligence reported a human matching your biometric profile had appeared inside Xyrith territory." He stopped speaking for a second. "We thought it was impossible." Veilira stepped closer, now despite her guards trying to stop her. "Who is he?" Nobody answered immediately. Ethan looked exhausted suddenly. Older somehow, like the weight inside him had become visible beneath the flashing red light. Captain Reyes glanced toward Veilira uncertainly before speaking carefully. During the Titan Front campaign, Supreme Commander Ethan Ward held the outer defense line for 72 hours against 6 invasion fleets. The chamber fell completely silent again. "No," one noble whispered immediately. "That is impossible. Ward died at Titan." Ethan finally looked toward the shattered palace windows and the stars beyond them. "That was the official report," he said softly. Veilira stared at him as if seeing an entirely different person standing before her now. Not a slave, not even a human. Something heavier, something history itself remembered. Then the palace lights flickered once more. A deep mechanical voice echoed through the chamber from hidden speakers across the walls. "Warning. Unauthorized warship signatures detected entering orbital range." Ethan closed his eyes briefly. "Too late," he murmured. "They found me." The palace windows trembled softly as engines thundered somewhere above the clouds. Not civilian engines. Heavy war drives. The kind that shook entire buildings before a single ship became visible. Every noble in the chamber heard it now. Fear spread quietly after that. Veilira stood frozen beside the shattered banquet table, staring at Ethan as though the universe itself had shifted shape in front of her. 3 days earlier, she had purchased him in chains from a frontier slave convoy. Quiet human, scarred hands, empty eyes. Now trained soldiers addressed him like a living legend. Ethan barely seemed to notice. His attention remained fixed on the ceiling, as if listening to sounds nobody else could hear. Captain Reyes stepped closer carefully. "Sir, we intercepted encrypted Dominion fleet chatter 30 minutes ago. Somebody sold your location." Ethan gave a small nod. Not surprise, just confirmation. "I figured." Veilira's expression hardened instantly. "You brought warships to my world." Ethan finally looked at her. No, his voice stayed calm. "War followed me here." The chamber lights flickered again as palace systems struggled under emergency power. Across the room, terrified nobles hurried toward the exits while guards established defensive lines around the perimeter. But nobody came near Ethan anymore. Even the alien soldiers kept their distance unconsciously. Veilira noticed that too. Respect mixed with fear. She hated how quickly the atmosphere changed around him. "You expect me to believe an entire fleet crossed sectors for one human?" she asked sharply. Ethan's tired eyes met hers. "Not for a human." His jaw tightened slightly. "For what I used to be." Before Veilira could answer, another warning echoed through the chamber. Orbital defense grid compromised. Multiple unidentified vessels entering lower atmosphere. A holographic tactical display suddenly activated above the center of the hall. Red markers flooded across the projection like drops of blood spreading through water. Several nobles gasped. One elderly advisor whispered, "That formation." Captain Reyes looked pale now. Iron Revenant-class destroyers. Ethan's face became unreadable. Black Fleet. The words hit Reyes hard enough to silence him immediately. Veilira stepped toward the hologram, silver eyes narrowing at the incoming ships. "Who are they?" Nobody answered right away. Ethan stared at the tactical projection for several long seconds before speaking quietly. The last army I ever commanded. Silence swallowed the chamber again. Somewhere nearby, glass cracked from another distant sonic boom overhead. Veilira turned toward him slowly. Your fleet is attacking my planet. Ethan shook his head once. Not my fleet anymore. There was something strange in his voice now. Regret maybe. Or grief stretched across too many years. Captain Reyes lowered his head carefully. After Titan Front collapsed, the surviving divisions refused surrender orders. Most believed you were murdered by the Terran Council. Ethan looked away from the hologram toward the stars outside. They were supposed to stand down. They never did, sir. Veilira watched him closely now. Really watched him for the first time. The human standing beside her did not look powerful. He looked exhausted. Like every breath carried memories too heavy to set down. Another tremor shook the palace floor. Dust drifted from the ceiling above them. Then the central hologram suddenly shifted colors. One massive warship appeared larger than the others, its dark hull scarred with ancient battle damage. Across the side of the vessel glowed faded silver letters nearly 60 feet high. Vigilance. Ethan stopped breathing for half a second. Veilira noticed immediately. For the first time since meeting him, real emotion crossed his face. Not anger. Not fear. Pain. Quiet and deep. Captain Reyes swallowed hard. Sir, they activated command recognition protocols. Ethan looked at the glowing ship in silence. Then a new voice filled the chamber. Cold. Mechanical. Ancient. Supreme Commander Ethan Ward identified. Awaiting operational orders. Every person in the palace turned toward him at once. Ethan closed his eyes slowly as the ship continued speaking through the palace systems. Welcome home, Commander. The mechanical voice echoed through the palace long after it stopped speaking. Welcome home, Commander. Nobody moved. Even the guards holding rifles near the chamber doors seemed uncertain what side they belonged to now. Outside the shattered windows, distant flashes illuminated the clouds as massive warships descended through the upper atmosphere. Their engines painted silver lines across the night sky, like scars reopening after years of silence. Ethan stood perfectly still beneath the crimson emergency lights. The glowing hologram reflected across his tired face while the old command ship hovered above the city like a ghost refusing to die. Veilira watched him carefully. She expected pride or triumph. Instead, she saw something far heavier. Regret. You commanded all of this? She asked quietly. Ethan took a slow breath before answering. Once. The words sounded exhausted. Around them, the palace continued descending into panic. Advisors rushed between holographic terminals while security officers shouted over collapsing communication channels. One terrified noble pointed toward the tactical display. Their orbital guns can level this continent. Another whispered, why would humans return now? Captain Reyes finally removed his gloves, revealing trembling hands. Because they never stopped looking for him. Ethan glanced sharply toward the younger officer. Enough. Reyes lowered his head immediately. Yes, sir. Veilira noticed the reaction instantly. Not fear of punishment. Loyalty. Deep enough to survive 15 years without orders. Ethan stepped toward the holographic projection slowly. His chain scraped softly against the marble floor with each step. Every eye in the room followed him now. The command ship above the planet pulsed once across the tactical map, awaiting instruction like an obedient predator. Ethan stared at it for several seconds before speaking quietly. Open a direct channel. Palace technicians hesitated. Nobody dared touch the controls. Veilira finally gestured sharply. Do it. Within seconds, the chamber lights dimmed again. A low-frequency hum rolled through the walls as communication systems synchronized with the warship overhead. Then the hologram shifted. A human face appeared above the center of the hall. Older woman. Gray streaks through dark hair. One artificial eye glowing faint blue beneath pale battle scars. She wore the black uniform of the old Terran High Command. The moment she saw Ethan, her expression cracked completely. Commander. The single word carried 15 years of grief inside it. Ethan's jaw tightened. Admiral Brooks. Several alien nobles exchanged nervous looks. They knew the name. Every military academy in the galaxy studied the Titan Front campaign. Amelia Brooks was the strategist who held the collapse corridor against impossible odds. Officially, she died beside Ethan Ward. Apparently, official history lied again. Brooks stared at Ethan through the hologram like someone afraid he might disappear if she blinked. "We received confirmation from the slave market recordings 3 days ago," she said softly. "I told them you were alive." Ethan looked away briefly. "You should have stayed hidden." A sad smile crossed Brooks' face. "You taught us not to abandon our own." Silence followed that. Heavy silence. Veilira felt something strange settle across the room then. Not military. Tension. Family. Broken people who survived the same nightmare recognizing each other again. Ethan rubbed one scarred hand across his face slowly. "How many ships?" Brooks hesitated. 42 combat capable. Several nobles gasped quietly. Ethan closed his eyes for a second. 42. Once he commanded thousands. "Too many," he murmured. Brooks studied him carefully now. "We are not here to start a war, sir." Ethan opened his eyes again. "Then why are orbital cannons charging above this planet?" Brooks did not answer immediately. Her artificial eye flickered softly beneath the hologram light. "Because somebody inside the Dominion sold your identity to the syndicate." The entire room froze. Veilira's expression hardened instantly. Ethan became very still. Brooks continued carefully. "The Black Fleet intercepted encrypted transmissions 6 hours ago. A kill order has already been issued." Ethan's voice dropped lower. "Colder." "By who?" Brooks looked directly toward Veilira. "Someone very close to House Veilira." The chamber turned colder after Admiral Brooks spoke those words. "Someone very close to House Veilira." No alarms sounded now. No noble shouted. Fear had become too heavy for noise. Veilira stood motionless beneath the dim emergency lights, her silver eyes fixed on the hologram above the palace floor. "Explain yourself," she said carefully. Brooks met her stare without hesitation. "Encrypted Dominion transmissions were routed through your private security channels 48 hours ago." Veilira's expression darkened instantly. "Impossible." Ethan remained silent beside the tactical display, but something subtle changed in him. His posture. His breathing, like an old instinct waking beneath scar tissue. He had spent decades surviving betrayal. He recognized the shape of it immediately. Brooks continued. "The syndicate placed a bounty on Commander Ward 3 years ago. Whoever exposed him intended to deliver proof before the Black Fleet arrived." One of Veilira's advisors suddenly stepped backward toward the rear exit. Ethan noticed first. His eyes shifted without moving his head. Small details. Elevated pulse. Uneven breathing. Right hand hovering too, close to concealed fabric folds beneath formal robes. Ethan's voice came low and calm. "Stop walking." The advisor froze instantly. Every guard in the room turned toward him. Veilira narrowed her eyes. "Minister Solon?" The older alien forced a nervous smile. "My lady, surely you do not suspect me because of human accusations." Ethan slowly stepped forward. Chains hanging from his wrists scraped softly across marble. "You are sweating," he said quietly. Solon's smile twitched slightly. "The palace is under attack." Ethan stopped 6 feet away from him. No, his eyes hardened for the first time all night. "You are sweating because you thought I was dead." Silence crashed over the chamber. Solon suddenly reached inside his robes. Guards raised rifles instantly, but Ethan moved first. One sharp step. One controlled motion. The hidden transmitter device clattered harmlessly across the marble floor before anyone realized Ethan had taken it from the minister's hand. Veilira stared in disbelief. She barely saw him move. Ethan examined the small black transmitter quietly. Syndicate encryption markings glowed faint red across its surface. Old Terran symbols scratched beneath newer modifications. He recognized the code immediately. His jaw tightened. "Ghost circuit operatives," he murmured. Brooks' expression darkened inside the hologram. "We feared that." Veilira looked between them sharply. "What is Ghost Circuit?" Ethan's eyes remained fixed on the device in his hand. "Former Terran intelligence." His voice sounded distant now, like memory pulling him backward through years he buried. "After the collapse wars, some units stopped protecting people." Brooks finished the thought quietly. "They became mercenaries." Solon's composure finally cracked. "You do not understand," he snapped, panic slipping into his voice. "The Syndicate promised stability. Human fleets terrify the entire galaxy. If Ward returned, the Dominion would collapse into another war." Ethan looked at him for several long seconds. Not angry, just tired. "So you sold a man to avoid a possibility." Solon swallowed hard. You are not a man anymore." The words lingered heavily in the chamber. Veilira looked toward Ethan then, waiting for anger, waiting for the monster history described. But Ethan only lowered his eyes briefly, like the insult exhausted him more than it hurt him. "Maybe not," he admitted softly. That answer unsettled her more than rage would have. Suddenly the palace shook violently beneath their feet. Several holographic displays flickered out completely. Outside the windows, massive shadows moved through the clouds overhead. Brooke's voice sharpened instantly. "Commander, multiple unidentified vessels just breached orbital containment." Ethan looked toward the sky. He recognized those engine signatures immediately. Not Black Fleet. Worse. The palace lights dimmed again as another warning echoed through the chamber. "Alert! Syndicate strike cruisers entering atmosphere." Captain Reyes cursed under his breath. Veilira's guards tightened formation around her. Ethan stared silently at the storm outside the shattered windows while distant engines rolled like thunder across the night. Then he spoke quietly. "They are not here for me anymore." Veilira looked at him sharply. "What does that mean?" Ethan's tired blue eyes reflected the burning lights descending through the clouds above the city. "It means," he said softly, "they are here to erase everyone who knows I survived." Rain began hitting the palace windows in slow metallic streaks as the first Syndicate cruisers descended through the clouds above the capital city. Their engines glowed pale orange against the night sky, casting long shadows across the towers of House Veilira. Inside the Grand Hall, nobody spoke anymore. Fear had evolved into something quieter, the understanding that history itself was about to wake up again. Ethan stood near the shattered window, overlooking the city below. Thousands of lights stretched across the horizon beneath the storm, unaware of what was approaching from orbit. He watched the streets silently. Civilian transports, market districts, residential towers, ordinary people going home after ordinary days. His eyes darkened slightly. Veilira stepped beside him carefully. "You knew this would happen eventually." Ethan did not answer right away. Wind slipped through the broken glass, stirring the loose fabric of his prison uniform. "I hope humanity had finally grown tired of war," he said softly. Another distant tremor rolled through the palace. Somewhere above the clouds, defense cannons activated. The sound echoed like mountains cracking apart. Captain Reyes approached quickly from the tactical station. "Commander, Black Fleet vessels are requesting engagement authorization." Ethan looked toward the hologram display where dozens of combat indicators flashed red across the atmosphere. Syndicate cruisers continued descending toward civilian sectors instead of military installations. Deliberate positioning. Ethan recognized the tactic immediately. Terror first. Negotiation second. "Negative authorization," he said calmly. Reyes froze. "Sir." Several officers turned toward Ethan in disbelief. Even Brooke's hologram flickered uncertainly. "Commander," she said carefully, "if we do not intercept now, the Syndicate will establish ground control within minutes." Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. "And if Black Fleet opens fire over a populated city, millions die before sunrise." Silence followed. Heavy silence. Veilira studied him closely again. Every story she ever heard about Ethan Ward described a ruthless strategist, a human war god who shattered fleets and conquered impossible battlefronts. But the man standing beside her sounded nothing like that legend. He sounded tired of burying people. Ethan looked toward the tactical projection. "Transmit civilian evacuation routes to every public channel." Reyes hesitated. "Sir, that will expose Black Fleet positions." Ethan finally turned toward him fully. "Do it anyway." Reyes straightened immediately. "Yes, sir." Veilira watched the younger officer obey without hesitation. Not because Ethan demanded it, because he trusted him completely. The realization unsettled her more than the warships outside. Brooks folded her hands behind her back inside the hologram. "You still think like a rescue commander." Ethan looked down briefly at the broken chains hanging from his wrists. "Someone has to." Another violent tremor shook the palace. This time the windows across the eastern side exploded. Inward from atmospheric shockwaves. Guards rushed to shield the nobles as rain and cold wind flooded the chamber. Through the storm above the city, enormous shadows finally emerged beneath the clouds. Syndicate carriers. Black hulls. Rows of glowing engines stretching nearly half a mile long. The civilians below began noticing them now. Tiny streams of traffic lit the streets as evacuation panic spread through the capital. Ethan stared upward at the descending ships without blinking. Then the palace communication systems crackled sharply. A distorted voice filled every speaker across the hall. "Attention, Black Fleet vessels. Surrender Ethan Ward immediately, and your surviving personnel will be spared." Ethan closed his eyes slowly. He recognized the voice. Older now, colder, but unmistakable. Brooks' expression hardened instantly. "Keller." Captain Reyes cursed quietly under his breath. Veilira looked between them. "Who is Keller?" Ethan opened his eyes again. The exhaustion inside them seemed deeper suddenly. "The man who taught me how to win wars," he said softly. Lightning flashed across the sky outside, illuminating the descending carriers above the city like enormous predators circling wounded prey. Then Ethan added quietly, "Before he forgot why we fought them." Rain hammered against the palace towers as the capital city descended into chaos below. Emergency sirens echoed through the streets. Streams of civilian transports filled the air lanes beneath the descending syndicate carriers, while distant defense cannons illuminated the clouds in violent flashes of blue light. Inside the shattered Grand Hall, Ethan stood motionless beneath the stormlit windows. The distorted voice of Keller still echoed faintly through the palace speakers like a ghost from another lifetime. Veilira studied Ethan carefully now. She expected hatred when he heard that name. Instead, she saw grief. "You trusted him once," she said quietly. Ethan gave a slow nod. "He taught me how to keep soldiers alive." Lightning flashed across the chamber, reflecting in his tired blue eyes. Then the war lasted too long. Brooks folded her arms inside the hologram display. "Keller believes fear is the only thing holding civilization together now." Ethan looked toward the burning sky above the city. "That is because he forgot what peace looks like." A new alarm suddenly activated across the tactical projection. Red indicators spread rapidly through the lower atmosphere. Reyes looked down at the display and went pale. "Commander, Syndicate boarding craft are descending directly towards civilian evacuation zones." Veilira stiffened instantly. "They are targeting refugees." Ethan's face hardened slightly. No, he watched the movement patterns for several silent seconds. "They are forcing panic traffic into kill corridors." The chamber fell quiet again. Even Veilira's guards looked disturbed now. This was not conquest. It was calculated terror. Ethan stepped toward the holographic console slowly. Rainwater dripped from his prison uniform onto the marble floor while the broken chains around his wrists clinked softly against each other. "Open a fleet-wide transmission." Brooks hesitated. "Commander." Ethan finally looked up at her fully. "Now." The old admiral straightened immediately. "Yes, sir." Seconds later, every speaker inside the palace synchronized with Black Fleet communications. The storm outside seemed quieter suddenly, like the entire sky was waiting. Ethan stood beneath the dim emergency lights while 42 warships listened for his voice after 15 years of silence. He closed his eyes briefly before speaking. "This is Ethan Ward." Across the tactical display, every Black Fleet indicator immediately shifted into formation alignment. No hesitation. No delay. All civilian sectors are now priority 1. Defensive positions only. No orbital bombardment under any circumstance. Several officers inside the palace exchanged shocked looks. Reyes stared at Ethan with visible disbelief. "Sir, if we hold defensive lines only, Keller gains atmospheric control." Ethan's voice remained calm. "Then we hold longer." Brooks lowered her head slightly. "Understood, Commander." Veilira watched the hologram carefully. Every human officer on every ship obeyed him instantly. Not because they feared him, because they trusted him with civilian lives more than their own survival. The realization settled heavily inside her chest. Ethan was not dangerous because he loved war. He was dangerous because he hated what war became. Suddenly, the palace communication systems crackled violently again. Keller's voice returned, colder this time. "Still pretending to be humanity's savior, Ethan?" Ethan's expression did not change. "You are risking millions of lives." Keller laughed softly through the speakers. "No, I am saving billions from another Terran collapse." Outside the windows, massive syndicate carriers descended lower through the storm clouds, their searchlights sweeping across the city like hunting eyes. Keller continued. "Look at them down there. Terrified civilians. Weak governments. Broken alliances. The galaxy needs order again. Ethan stared silently at the streets below, where evacuation transports struggled through the rain. Families, workers, children, ordinary people trying to survive another night. Order built on fear always collapses, he said quietly. Keller's voice sharpened instantly. That weakness is why Earth burned. The chamber froze. Veilira saw it immediately. Something deep behind Ethan's eyes moved for the first time all night. Pain. Real pain. Keller lowered his voice. Tell me, Ethan, how many graves did Mercy save at Titan Front? Rain lashed against the broken palace windows while the city lights below flickered beneath the descending warships. Ethan stood perfectly still for several long seconds before finally answering in a voice barely above a whisper. Not enough. The storm above the capital burned silver and blue as two fleets hung across the night sky, like ancient gods deciding the fate of strangers below. Rain poured through the shattered palace windows while evacuation sirens echoed endlessly across the city streets. Ethan stood in silence beside the holographic command table, staring at the millions of civilian markers moving through the darkness beneath the descending carriers. For several long seconds after his final words, nobody spoke. Not Brooks, not Reyes, not even Keller. Then the syndicate commander finally exhaled softly through the transmission channel. You still carry them with you. Ethan's eyes remained fixed on the city below. Every day, Keller's voice lost some of its coldness after that. Just for a moment. Titan Front broke all of us, Ethan. A distant flash illuminated the clouds outside as orbital defense cannons activated somewhere beyond the atmosphere. The palace trembled beneath the shockwave. Veilira looked toward Ethan carefully. If he was once your ally, then why hunt you now? Ethan lowered his eyes briefly toward the broken chains hanging from his wrists. Because I disappeared. His voice sounded quieter than the rain. And men like Keller cannot survive uncertainty. Brooks folded her hands behind her back inside the fading hologram. Black Fleet followed your final standing order for 15 years. Veilira looked confused. What order? Ethan answered before Brooks could. Protect civilians first. Silence settled across the chamber again. Heavy and human. Outside the palace windows, civilian transports continued streaming through the storm, while Black Fleet vessels repositioned themselves between the city and the descending syndicate carriers. Not attacking. Shielding. Veilira slowly turned toward Ethan then. The human she mocked days ago no longer resembled the stories whispered across the galaxy. He was not driven by conquest or revenge. He looked like a man exhausted by survival itself. Keller's voice returned through the speakers one final time. Stand down the fleet, Ethan. Come with me willingly, and the city lives. Ethan finally lifted his eyes toward the storm overhead. And if I refuse? Keller hesitated. Only briefly. Then history repeats itself. The chamber lights flickered softly while rainwater ran across the marble floor around Ethan's boots. He stood motionless for several seconds before speaking into the silence. No, the single word carried no anger. Only certainty. Then Ethan stepped toward the shattered palace window. Wind pulled against his prison uniform as he looked down at the frightened city beneath him. Open all Black Fleet public channels, he said quietly. Brooks nodded once. Channels open. Ethan took a slow breath. Across orbit, 42 warships waited for his voice. Across the city, millions of civilians listened without realizing it. This is Ethan Ward, he said calmly. To every civilian in the capital, keep moving toward evacuation shelters. Black Fleet will hold the sky. Even Keller stayed silent now. Ethan continued while thunder rolled across the atmosphere behind him. No government abandoned you tonight. No species abandoned you. Not human. Not Xyrath. Not anyone. Veilira felt something tighten painfully in her chest as she listened. The room around her had gone completely still. Ethan's voice softened near the end. Fear survives by convincing people they are alone. Lightning illuminated the storm clouds one final time. You are not alone. Then the transmission ended. Quiet returned to the chamber except for rain tapping softly against broken glass. Ethan stood there watching the city lights beneath the storm while the chains around his wrists reflected pale silver in the dark. Veilira slowly approached him through the silence. For the first time since they met, she lowered her head respectfully. Not to a conqueror, not to a weapon, To a tired human being who still chose mercy after everything the galaxy had done to him, Ethan barely noticed. His eyes remained fixed on the civilians fleeing through the rain below. "Do they still call you a war god?" Veilira asked softly. Ethan looked toward the distant stars beyond the storm clouds. His expression carried the weight of too many graves and too many second chances. Only people who never saw the cost of war. The rain kept falling after that. But somewhere above the city, the warships stopped descending.